Human beings are storytellers by nature. From the earliest days, before writing, before cities, before any scientific understanding of the world, our ancestors gathered around fires and told stories about why the sun rises, why storms come, why people die. Those stories gave shape to fear. They gave meaning to what felt chaotic. And even though we now understand lightning as electricity and disease as biology, the emotional pull of those ancient stories still lingers deep inside the human mind. Belief isn't just about the content of those stories. It's about the function they serve. The human brain evolved to look for patterns, even when they don't exist. This helped our ancestors survive. It was better to assume the rustle in the grass was a predator than to ignore it. That same instinct makes us see intention where there's only randomness, purpose where there's only chance. When lightning struck, early humans saw the anger of gods. When crops failed, they saw punishment. The brain's tendency to assign agency became the foundation of spiritual thinking. As societies grew more complex, those early beliefs hardened into systems, religions that promised answers, order, and belonging. But the core psychology behind belief remained the same. People still wanted certainty in an uncertain world, and religion offered a map, even if the map was drawn from imagination rather than evidence. Modern psychology shows that belief often fulfills deep emotional needs before it satisfies intellectual ones. Studies on cognitive dissonance reveal that when evidence challenges a deeply held belief, most people don't reconsider. They rationalize. They twist new facts until they fit the old narrative. This is called motivated reasoning, and it's one of the strongest forces in the human mind. Religion thrives in that space, not because its claims are proven, but because its stories resonate with how our brains naturally protect themselves from fear and doubt. The human mind values comfort more than truth. The idea that life has a divine plan feels safer than the idea that existence is random and indifferent. For many, letting go of religion means letting go of cosmic purpose, and that's a heavy psychological cost. So belief persists, even when evidence accumulates against it. Cognitive scientists have also found that belief tends to form in childhood, when the brain is most impressionable. A child doesn't question authority. They absorb it. When a trusted adult says a God is watching, that message bypasses skepticism and takes root in emotional memory. By the time critical thinking develops, the belief feels like identity. Questioning it feels like betrayal, not just of ideas, but of family, culture, and even self. That's why religion is often so resistant to evidence. The believer doesn't merely defend a claim about the universe. They defend a part of who they are. To lose belief can feel like psychological disintegration, like pulling a thread that unravels everything that gives life structure. So rather than examining evidence, the mind often builds walls around the belief. Doubt is treated as danger. Facts become filtered through emotion. This doesn't mean religious people are irrational. It means they're human. The same psychological mechanisms that drive belief also shape patriotism, ideology, and even consumer loyalty. Humans are wired for belonging. We seek tribes. We trust stories that unite us with others. Religion simply packages these instincts in sacred language. Neuroscientific research adds another layer. Brain scans show that when people pray or experience what they describe as spiritual feelings, the same neural circuits light up that are involved in love, attachment, and safety. The experience feels real because it is real. Inside the brain, the sensation of a divine presence is produced by the same chemistry that bonds a child to a parent or one partner to another. The comfort of belief is deeply biological, and that's the paradox. Religion feels true not because of evidence, but because it activates the brain's most intimate emotional systems. To question that feels like self-betrayal, like turning against your own internal sense of connection. This is why logical arguments against religion often fail to persuade. They address the intellect, while belief lives in emotion. Sociologists studying conversion and deconversion often note that belief doesn't shift because of facts. It shifts because of experiences. A person might lose faith not after reading a scientific paper, but after seeing hypocrisy in a preacher, or suffering a tragedy that their theology couldn't explain. Emotional disillusionment often precedes intellectual change. The mind moves only after the heart breaks its old attachments, but even then, the pull of belief can remain. Many former believers describe an emotional afterimage, a reflexive fear of divine punishment, or a lingering habit of prayer when anxious. This shows how deeply belief embeds itself in neural patterns, how it weaves through both thought and feeling. It's important to understand that belief is not purely about the supernatural. It's about structure, identity, and narrative continuity. Religion offers a complete worldview, a sense of moral order, and a community that reinforces that order. Evidence alone doesn't replace those things. Facts can dismantle myths, but they can't fill the emotional and social void those myths once occupied. That's why even well-educated, intelligent people often cling to religion. They may see contradictions, but the alternative, existential uncertainty, feels worse. The psychology of belief, then, is not about gullibility. It's about need. It's about the tension between truth and comfort, reason and emotion. People cling to religion because it satisfies something deeper than logic. The yearning for meaning, the fear of loss, the desire for control in a chaotic world. Every culture develops its own gods, but the psychological roots are the same. The human mind, left alone with uncertainty, builds patterns until it finds one that feels stable. Religion becomes that pattern, a story that explains suffering, a promise that death isn't final, a moral order that justifies the good and punishes the bad. Once adopted, that pattern becomes part of the lens through which reality itself is seen. That lens can be incredibly powerful. It shapes how people interpret everything: science, politics, morality, even personal success or failure. To question the lens feels like questioning reality itself, and that's what makes belief so enduring. It's not just a view about gods. It's a worldview that anchors every other thought. Religion also offers social reinforcement. Belief is contagious, not just because of ideas, but because of belonging. Humans are social learners. When everyone around you believes, disbelief feels isolating. The brain associates social exclusion with physical pain, literally. Neuroscientific studies show that rejection activates the same brain regions as physical injury. In such an environment, conformity isn't weakness. It's survival. People believe partly because others believe. That's why religions rely on community rituals, shared prayers, songs, symbols, and celebrations. These create what psychologists call collective effervescence, a sense of unity that strengthens emotional bonds and reinforces shared beliefs. When thousands chant or sing together, the individual self dissolves into the group. That feeling can be intoxicating. It feels divine, but it's human chemistry: dopamine, oxytocin, endorphins. These experiences anchor faith in the body as much as in the mind. As societies modernize, those same mechanisms still operate, even if the setting changes. Some find belonging in nationalism, fandom, or ideology, secular forms of the same psychological need. Religion isn't an isolated phenomenon. It's one expression of the human drive for certainty and connection. The evidence against religious claims doesn't erase the emotional architecture that keeps them alive. So when people cling to religion despite overwhelming evidence, it's not because they haven't heard the arguments. It's because those arguments threaten something deeper than belief. They threaten identity, belonging, and the illusion of control. The evidence speaks to reason. Religion speaks to fear, hope, and love. In the human hierarchy of needs, those emotions often win. The persistence of belief is often misunderstood as ignorance, but that's a shallow explanation. Most believers aren't uninformed. Many are fully aware of scientific discoveries, logical contradictions, and historical inconsistencies. Yet they still believe. The question isn't why they don't know better. It's why they can't let go even when they do. One of the most powerful forces behind this is confirmation bias. Once we accept something as true, the mind naturally filters information to protect that assumption. It welcomes anything that supports it and dismisses what doesn't. This isn't a flaw limited to religion. It's a universal human tendency. But in religion, it's amplified by emotion and reinforced by community. A believer might see every coincidence as divine guidance, every answered prayer as proof, while ignoring the countless prayers that go unanswered. The mind builds a self-reinforcing loop, where faith validates itself regardless of evidence. This feedback loop is sustained by what psychologists call belief perseverance. Even after the original reasons for belief are disproven, the belief itself remains. In experiments, people who are told that a false claim was retracted still behave as though it were true. The explanation is simple. Once a belief becomes part of one's worldview, removing it creates a gap, and the brain prefers an incorrect story to no story at all. Religion fills those gaps with narratives that are emotionally satisfying. A God who loves you, watches over you, and promises eternal life. That's a story the brain wants to keep. The alternative, a vast, indifferent universe, offers no comfort, no moral guarantees, no happy endings. To the emotional brain, disbelief feels like stepping off a cliff. So even when evidence contradicts scripture or dogma, the mind finds ways to reinterpret the contradiction rather than face the fall. Fear of death plays a central role in this. Terror management theory, a well-established field in psychology, shows that when people are reminded of their mortality, their religious convictions become stronger. Death awareness triggers a kind of psychological defense. Belief in an afterlife reduces anxiety about non-existence. This explains why faith often grows in times of crisis, war, disease, loss. Religion provides the illusion of permanence in a transient world. The irony is that many religious institutions are fully aware of this dynamic. They emphasize mortality to strengthen commitment. Sermons dwell on the afterlife, not because there's evidence for it, but because the fear of death keeps believers emotionally dependent. Eternal life becomes a product people buy into, a psychological insurance policy against oblivion. Beyond fear, religion also fulfills a deep moral need. Humans crave a sense of right and wrong that feels objective and unchanging. Religion offers that in a simple, ready-made form. But moral instincts evolved long before Scripture. Empathy, fairness, and cooperation are traits that helped our ancestors survive as social species. Religion didn't create morality. It codified it. Yet the illusion of divine authority gives moral comfort. People trust commandments more than complexity. Belief provides moral certainty where life offers only gray areas. That moral certainty, however, can become a psychological trap. When people believe their morality comes from a divine source, questioning the doctrine feels like questioning morality itself. This conflation makes evidence-based thinking nearly impossible. To accept that moral values evolved through social and biological processes would mean admitting that goodness doesn't require gods, and that's an idea many find threatening. Social identity is another anchor. Religion is rarely an isolated belief. It's a membership card. It provides rituals, community, and a sense of belonging. Sociological research consistently finds that people who attend religious services regularly report higher social satisfaction, not necessarily because of faith, but because of human connection. Belief is socially rewarded. Doubt is punished. In that environment, skepticism feels like exile. To question too deeply risks losing not just faith but family, friends, and community ties. That's a powerful deterrent against change. This social dimension explains why belief often aligns with geography rather than reason. A child born in Saudi Arabia grows up Muslim. One born in Mexico likely becomes Catholic. In India, Hindu. In Utah, Mormon. Belief patterns follow cultural boundaries, not evidence. If faith were based on truth, geography wouldn't matter. But since it's based on social conditioning, it matters entirely. People inherit gods like they inherit language, by absorption, not by choice. When faith is cultural, dissent feels like betrayal. Leaving religion means more than changing an opinion. It can mean losing your place in the social fabric. Many people stay believers because they can't bear the cost of leaving. Even those who stop believing often continue participating in rituals out of loyalty, habit, or fear of ostracism. This is known as belief in belief, the idea that even if a doctrine isn't true, it's useful or necessary for social cohesion. It's an emotional compromise that keeps the illusion alive. There's also the illusion of control. Religion promises that life's chaos can be tamed by obedience, prayer, or faith. For the brain, which evolved to seek control over the environment, that's profoundly comforting. When something terrible happens, a child gets sick, a storm destroys a home, randomness feels unbearable. The idea that it was part of a plan restores psychological balance. Studies show that when people feel powerless, they're more likely to perceive patterns and intentions where none exist, a phenomenon called illusory agency detection. Religion thrives in that cognitive space, providing explanations that soothe uncertainty. And because religion sanctifies authority, it reduces the discomfort of ambiguity. Humans prefer clear rules to open-ended freedom. Being told what to believe, how to behave, and what purpose to serve gives structure to life. Freedom can be overwhelming. Dogma is simple. This is why fundamentalism appeals to so many. Not because the doctrines are persuasive, but because they offer clarity in a confusing world. At the neurological level, certainty activates the brain's reward system. It produces feelings of calm and satisfaction. Uncertainty, on the other hand, triggers stress responses. Belief provides psychological stability by offering absolute answers, even false ones. The more anxious a society becomes, the stronger it's pulled toward certainty, whether in religion or ideology. It's not coincidence that periods of social instability often coincide with religious revivals. Fear breeds faith. There's also a psychological mechanism called the just world fallacy, the belief that the world is fundamentally fair, that good people are rewarded and bad people punished. This belief helps people cope with injustice, but it's not true. The world is indifferent to virtue. Yet religion preserves this illusion by pushing justice into the afterlife. Suffering makes sense if it's part of a divine plan. Cruelty can be endured if it leads to heavenly reward. This narrative doesn't match evidence, but it offers emotional relief. The desire for fairness also fuels moral judgment. Many religious believers cling to the idea of divine justice because it ensures ultimate accountability. A world without God, to them, feels morally unsafe. They struggle to imagine goodness without supervision. But morality enforced by fear of punishment isn't morality. It's compliance. True compassion, empathy, and integrity don't require invisible surveillance. They arise from shared humanity. Yet for those conditioned to see morality as obedience, the idea of a godless ethic feels empty, even dangerous. That emptiness is where many retreat back to belief. They can't imagine meaning without a higher purpose. But meaning isn't discovered. It's created. Human beings invent meaning through relationships, creativity, and understanding. Religion simply outsources that process to a divine figure, making it feel objective. Without that external anchor, people face the raw task of building meaning themselves, and that's difficult work. It requires emotional maturity, not certainty. All of these psychological mechanisms, confirmation bias, mortality fear, social belonging, moral dependence, and the need for control form an intricate web. Together, they make religion more than a set of doctrines. They make it a psychological ecosystem. Once a person enters that ecosystem, it's self-reinforcing. Each emotional reward strengthens the next, and every doubt that arises triggers defense mechanisms that restore balance. The belief system protects itself, like an immune response. That's why challenging religious belief is so difficult, even with undeniable evidence. It's not just an argument about facts. It's an argument against the brain's own defense system. Facts are weak against feelings that preserve identity. Logic doesn't break walls built from fear, comfort, and belonging. To move beyond religion requires more than intellect. It requires emotional courage, the willingness to face uncertainty, to live without the safety net of divine order, to accept that meaning is not given but made. And that, perhaps, is why belief persists. Because reality, as it is, offers no guarantees. It's vast, indifferent, and often unjust. Religion, for all its flaws, tells a softer story. One where we matter, where suffering has a reason, and where death isn't the end. That story is powerful precisely because it speaks to what people need, not to what's true. The endurance of religion is not only psychological, it's institutional. What begins as private belief becomes reinforced by powerful systems designed to preserve it. Religious institutions learned long ago that if you control the conditions in which belief forms, you don't need to control every believer. You just need to shape the environment that makes doubt uncomfortable and faith desirable. One of the strongest environmental factors is authority. Humans are deeply conditioned to obey those perceived as legitimate leaders. From childhood, we learn to trust parents, teachers, and figures of power. That trust becomes an emotional shortcut. It allows us to navigate complexity without constant skepticism. When a priest, rabbi, or imam speaks with confidence, that same instinctive deference activates. The believer feels reassured, not because the claims are verified, but because authority feels safe. Social psychologist Stanley Milgram's famous obedience experiments demonstrated this vividly. Participants, instructed by an authoritative figure in a lab coat, continued delivering what they believed were painful electric shocks to another person, simply because they were told to. The majority complied, even when it conflicted with their conscience. Authority can override moral intuition. Religious authority leverages the same mechanism, but instead of a lab coat, it wears robes, carries sacred symbols, and speaks in moral absolutes. The appearance of divine endorsement magnifies obedience into devotion. This relationship between authority and belief is reinforced by tradition. The older a belief feels, the truer it seems. Psychologists call this the appeal to antiquity, the assumption that longevity equals validity. But traditions survive not because they're true, but because they're functional. They offer stability in a changing world. When people say, "It's what we've always believed," they're really saying, "This belief has kept us together." The truth becomes secondary to cohesion. Rituals play a crucial role in maintaining that cohesion. Anthropologists studying religious behavior note that rituals create emotional synchronization. When people kneel together, chant together, or fast together, their physiological rhythms align: heart rate, breathing, even neural patterns. This synchronization generates trust and unity. Over time, the ritual itself becomes sacred, regardless of its original meaning. The act of participation reinforces belonging, and belonging reinforces belief. To stop participating feels like stepping outside humanity itself. The institution capitalizes on this by linking conformity to virtue. Doubt becomes sin. Curiosity becomes pride. Dissent becomes rebellion against the divine. These associations are powerful forms of social control. They frame skepticism not as an intellectual position, but as a moral failure. Even questioning can provoke guilt, not because the question is wrong, but because the believer has been trained to equate obedience with goodness. Guilt and fear form the emotional glue of religious systems. Fear of punishment, fear of isolation, fear of eternal damnation, all shape behavior long before they shape thought. In childhood, these fears are internalized through stories, symbols, and repetition. A child learns that unseen eyes watch them, that bad thoughts invite consequences, that questioning sacred authority risks divine anger. This internal surveillance continues into adulthood as conscience, but one built not on reason, rather on conditioned fear. Psychologists studying moral development note that fear-based morality is the earliest stage of ethical reasoning. It's the same logic that guides children. Don't do bad things or you'll be punished. Mature morality, in contrast, grows from empathy, fairness, and reasoning about consequences. But religion often arrests this development by keeping people anchored in fear of authority. Morality becomes obedience instead of understanding. The believer may behave kindly, but often because they are afraid not to. This dynamic explains why many believers feel lost when they begin doubting. The fear of moral collapse is genuine. They've been told their goodness depends on their faith. Without divine guidance, they fear becoming immoral, selfish, or purposeless. In reality, morality doesn't disappear. It just shifts from obedience to awareness. But for someone conditioned to external authority, that transition feels like chaos. Another psychological mechanism that keeps people tethered to religion is in-group bias. Humans evolved in small tribes where loyalty meant survival. Those instincts persist. We divide the world into us and them, and we derive self-esteem from belonging to the right group. Religion magnifies this bias by giving it divine justification. Believers see their community not just as a social group, but as chosen, righteous, and special. The outsider becomes morally inferior, spiritually lost, or even dangerous. This division creates a feedback loop. The more conflict between groups, the stronger the in-group identity becomes. Religion, by promising ultimate truth, makes compromise feel like betrayal. And the more a belief system is challenged, the more its followers close ranks. Persecution, real or imagined, strengthens solidarity. The irony is that every challenge meant to weaken religion can end up reinforcing it by activating the very psychology that protects identity. The institutional layer builds on this with sophisticated reinforcement systems. Regular rituals, confession, public prayer, and communal worship all serve to renew commitment. Every act of belief becomes both a declaration and a rehearsal. When you repeat a statement enough times, it feels true. Psychologists call this the illusory truth effect. The mind mistakes familiarity for accuracy. The more often a doctrine is recited, the more real it feels, regardless of evidence. Even architecture plays a role. Cathedrals, mosques, and temples are designed to dwarf the individual. Vast ceilings, echoing halls, light filtering through stained glass. These sensory experiences evoke awe, a psychological state that lowers critical thinking and increases suggestibility. In moments of awe, the boundaries of the self dissolve. The person feels part of something vast and eternal. Religion translates that feeling into the language of divinity. The building becomes a cognitive tool, a structure that creates the illusion of transcendence. And then there's habit. Belief isn't maintained solely by thought, but by repetition. Attending services, saying prayers, performing rituals. These actions become automatic. Once integrated into routine, they sustain belief even when doubt arises. The brain seeks consistency between behavior and belief. This is known as cognitive consistency theory. If you pray daily, you subconsciously strengthen the assumption that prayer works. To stop praying would create discomfort, so the behavior continues, reinforcing the faith. Over time, this cycle becomes self-contained. The believer isn't consciously deceiving themselves. They're following the path of least psychological resistance. Religion offers coherence, belonging, and comfort. And once it's woven into daily life, it feels inseparable from reality itself. But perhaps the most fascinating part of belief psychology is that even skeptics aren't immune. The same cognitive shortcuts that make religion persuasive operate in everyone. Secular ideologies, political movements, and even scientific communities can fall prey to the same tribalism, hero worship, and dogmatic certainty. Humans crave meaning and identity, no matter what label they wear. Religion simply refined that instinct over millennia. This is why dismantling religion in society is not as simple as replacing it with facts. It requires understanding the psychological infrastructure beneath it, the neural habits, emotional dependencies, and social dynamics that give belief its staying power. Without addressing those, disbelief can leave a vacuum that other ideologies rush to fill. History shows that when religion weakens, other forms of collective faith, nationalism, cults of personality, conspiracy movements, often emerge to satisfy the same psychological hunger. In that sense, religion isn't an anomaly. It's a mirror. It reflects the human mind's desire for order, belonging, and purpose. What changes is only the vocabulary. Gods replaced by ideologies, scriptures replaced by manifestos. The psychology remains. Still, understanding this doesn't make religion harmless. The same mechanisms that comfort individuals can also be exploited by power. When belief becomes institutionalized, it turns from private solace into public control. Leaders use faith to justify authority, to suppress dissent, to maintain hierarchies. The believer feels virtuous obeying. The system thrives on that obedience. History is full of examples: inquisitions, holy wars, theocratic regimes, all built on the fusion of sincere belief and political manipulation. The most striking feature of this manipulation is how invisible it becomes. The believer rarely feels coerced. They feel inspired. They see obedience as choice, submission as devotion. That's the brilliance of belief systems. They transform control into virtue. Once people internalize the belief that submission pleases the divine, they will police themselves. The most effective chains are the ones we don't feel. And yet, within that system, individual sincerity is real. The priest who comforts the dying, the nun who helps the poor, the worshiper who feels peace in prayer. Their experiences are authentic. What's false is the interpretation layered on top. The feeling of transcendence is human. Religion just claims ownership of it. The challenge is not to deny those feelings, but to understand them as natural products of mind and culture, not proof of the supernatural. Recognizing that distinction is crucial. It allows empathy without endorsement, respect for the person, but not for the illusion. Many people stay religious because they equate rejection of religion with rejection of meaning, love, or compassion. In reality, those things belong to humanity itself. Religion borrowed them. It never created them. But perhaps the most profound reason people cling to religion, even when confronted with contradictory evidence, is not fear or tradition or even comfort. It's meaning. For centuries, religion has offered not just explanations for the universe, but purpose within it. It tells people why they are here, what they should do, and where they are going. It turns the chaos of life into a story, one with heroes, villains, suffering, redemption, and hope. In this sense, religion is not just a belief system. It's a narrative framework, and human beings are storytellers by nature. Our brains evolved to organize information through story. We remember events better when they follow a narrative arc. We assign moral lessons to random outcomes. We imagine ourselves as protagonists in a cosmic drama. Religion, in this light, is the oldest and most enduring story we've ever told, one that binds us to one another through shared myth and emotion. So when science removes that story, or when skepticism dismantles it piece by piece, what remains can feel unbearably empty. Evidence may reveal the how of existence, but it rarely comforts us with a why. And that emotional gap between knowledge and meaning is where belief finds its home. This is why many people who leave religion describe a period of existential vertigo. The universe becomes vast and impersonal. Morality feels uncertain. Death looms larger. Without the story, the human mind struggles to find direction, so some return to faith. Others construct new philosophies, humanism, spirituality, even personal forms of mysticism, to fill that same emotional need for coherence. From a psychological standpoint, belief is not a weakness. It's a byproduct of the brain's search for stability in a complex world. It is what psychologist Viktor Frankl called the will to meaning, the deep human need to find significance, even in suffering. When that meaning collapses, despair follows. Religion, regardless of its factual accuracy, offers an antidote to despair. But here lies the paradox. The very thing that makes religion emotionally powerful also makes it intellectually resistant to change. If your sense of identity, morality, and destiny are all woven into a sacred story, then questioning that story feels like erasing yourself. The mind reacts as if under attack, and so defense mechanisms activate. Rationalization, denial, selective memory, moral justification. The believer is not simply rejecting evidence. They are protecting their world. We see this dynamic everywhere, in political ideologies, nationalism, even fandoms. But religion magnifies it through the weight of eternity. To be wrong about your faith, for some, means to lose not only your moral compass but your afterlife. The stakes could not be higher. That's why logic alone rarely changes deeply held beliefs. Evidence can point to truth, but only empathy can open the door for someone to walk through it. In recent years, cognitive scientists have studied what happens when people are gently guided, rather than confronted, into examining their faith. When questions are posed not as attacks but as invitations to think, defensive barriers lower. The believer begins to reflect rather than react. This is why dialogues, not debates, often lead to genuine change. A debate triggers the ego. A dialogue engages the conscience. In this way, understanding the psychology of belief is not merely an academic pursuit. It is an act of compassion. It helps us see that behind every dogma there is a person, shaped by fear, love, and the timeless desire to make sense of life. And perhaps the goal, then, is not to destroy religion, but to evolve beyond the parts of it that imprison the mind, to carry forward its capacity for awe, morality, and community, while letting go of superstition and fear. Because the real question is not whether humans will believe, we always will, but what we will choose to believe in. Will it be stories that divide us, or truths that unite us? To understand why people cling to religion despite the evidence is not to condemn them. It is to recognize something deeply human. For all our reason and intellect, we remain emotional beings shaped by fear, hope, and longing. Our minds evolved not to seek truth at any cost, but to seek survival, connection, and meaning. Religion for millennia has offered all three. It gave early humans a moral compass in chaotic tribes. It bound societies together with shared rituals. It gave language to the mysteries of death and existence long before science could. In that sense, religion was an evolutionary tool, a cultural technology that brought order to our fears. But what once guided us now often binds us. The same stories that united tribes in ancient deserts and forests can divide nations today. Beliefs that once explained the world now resist the world's explanations. The problem isn't faith itself, it's when faith stops us from seeing. Modern psychology shows that belief is rarely a product of logic alone. We believe first, often through emotion, family, or culture, and then we rationalize. Our reasoning mind becomes a lawyer defending the verdict that our emotional mind has already delivered. So when evidence challenges a sacred idea, the mind doesn't weigh the facts. It protects the identity. It says, "I'm not wrong. The evidence is." And just like that, truth becomes negotiable. But even this impulse has a kind of beauty to it. It shows that belief is rooted in care. Care for belonging, for morality, for meaning. People don't cling to faith because they are blind. They cling because they are afraid to lose what faith gives them. The task of reason, then, is not to tear that away, but to replace it with something better. Imagine a world where meaning is drawn, not from myth, but from understanding. Where wonder isn't confined to scripture, but found in galaxies, in consciousness, in the quiet elegance of a mathematical law. Where morality doesn't depend on fear of divine punishment, but on empathy and shared humanity. That world is not cold or soulless. It is more alive than ever. Because truth itself can be sacred, if we learn to see it that way. To evolve beyond religion is not to abandon meaning. It is to discover meaning through truth. It is to move from inherited belief to conscious understanding. From faith that demands obedience to knowledge that invites curiosity. Perhaps the real journey of humanity is not from faith to disbelief, but from unexamined belief to awakened belief. A belief in reality, in compassion, in the beauty of the unknown. Because the truth is vast. It does not need protecting. It only needs discovering. And when we finally have the courage to let go of the stories that no longer serve us, we may find something even more profound waiting in their place. Not a God written in ancient books, but the quiet divinity of understanding itself. This has been The Psychology of Belief. Why people cling to religion despite the evidence.